What is going on, guys? I'm Paul Ryan, your host of the ATB Fantasy Show. If you're new to the show, thank you for joining us. And to the regular listeners, welcome back. Unfortunately, there is no guest tonight. However, instead of a guest, I have a new co host, guys. Ladies and gentlemen, you've seen him on the show and on Twitter. Please welcome my new co host, Mr. Pigskin Papers himself, Dave Hartman. Dave, how are you?
I'm good, Paul, and I like being introduced like that. So thank you very much. Doing okay here in New York, waiting for the weather to come. But yeah, all is well. It's interesting. These 4-day football weekends with the NFL are a little different, and it didn't really have time to catch my breath last week with games on Thursday, Saturday,
Yeah.
Sunday, Monday. And we have that again this weekend, kind of wall-to-wall football. And for the NFL junkie, it's nice.
Absolutely, yeah. I was working on my my article this week as well, and that was kind of part of my intro, talking about how this weekend we've got football on Saturday and Sunday, and it just also happens to be Christmas, so it's
Yeah.
a nice weekend to look forward to.
Yeah, there's actually more games on Saturday than Sunday, which is really unusual. I can't
Oh
remember
wow,
the NFL doing that before. I think there's only 3 games on Saturday and 1 on Thursday and 1 on Monday. So, sorry, 3 on Sunday, 1 on
yeah,
Thursday, 1 on Monday. So that leaves 11 games on Saturday. That's a lot for a
man, that
Saturday.
is a lot. Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
lot
I
of
think it's
football for
because
the one.
it's because Sunday's Christmas, so
Right,
that they're doing it that way.
and not only that, but you get all that football, you get Christmas, and then most people are going to have a 3-day weekend as well.
Yeah, yeah, and then New Year's with another
Yeah,
NFL weekend. So a lot of football, and then all the bowl games. So this is when football really gets like 24/7 for a lot of people.
yeah, it's a good time of year.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Dave, I mentioned you on Twitter. Remind the people they can find you, sir.
Yeah, thanks. I'm at Pigskin Papers. Both the P and the P are capitalized. And my blog, where I post all my football content, is thepigskinpapers.com.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Guys, I'm Paul Ryan. You can find me on Twitter at Paul_Ryan15. Well, it was an absolutely crazy week with some crazy finishes last week, Dave. For you, what was the biggest OMG moment?
For me, it's the Vikings and the Colts, and I know there were there were a couple of other games that had crazy finishes. I think 3 games went to overtime, including the Minnesota and Colts game. A bunch of games were decided in addition to those on the last play. Buffalo, Miami, and San Diego. San Diego, I still call them San Diego. The Chargers and the Titans. There were a lot of games that came down to the wire, but the Minnesota Indianapolis game was as I think everyone knows, the biggest comeback in the history of the league. It was 33-0 at the half. Before this one, the biggest comeback had been 32 points, which you may not remember this one because it was 1993, but it was a game I watched. It was a playoff game between the Buffalo Bills and the old Houston Oilers, who became the Tennessee Titans. And interestingly, the quarterback who engineered that 32-point comeback, who was the Bills' backup, was Frank Reich, who
Oh, wow.
of course, was the Colts coach until about a month and a half ago.
Yeah.
He was in for the injured Jim Kelly. But getting back to the Colts and the Vikings, I mean, the Vikings, if you look at everything that happened in that game, they turned the ball over on downs 3 times. They punted 6 times. They threw 2 interceptions, one of which was returned for a touchdown. They fumbled once. On the first possession of the second half, when they were down 33-0, they went 3 and out. They had all those things happen. They were down that many points, and they still won the game. And I think for a lot of people turned the game off, and they were like, "Oh, good, I got my Saturday afternoon back." That was a game that was over. And if you look at the history of the NFL, there's something like close to 1,600 games in the 100-year history of the league have had a 30-point lead at some point in the game. A team has gone up by 30. And the only time that a team has done that and lost was the game I just referenced, the playoff game between the Oilers and the Bills. So I think anytime something happens that's only happened once before, and that's like 99.9% of the time that someone's had that kind of lead, they've won. For me, that was the biggest OMG moment. And on a personal note, and I know we'll talk more about fantasy football later in the episode, but
Yeah.
I'm in 2 leagues, and Kirk Cousins is my QB in both leagues. One's a super flex, so he was one of my QBs. He had negative points at the half. So
Oh man.
not only was I ready to turn the game off, but I was like kissing one of my fantasy seasons goodbye, and the other one I was pretty worried about them maybe taking him out of the game because it was such a blowout, or you know, or him just throwing more interceptions in a futile attempt to try to come back. And he ended up being one of the high scorers of the week. So on a personal note, it was an OMG moment from that standpoint. But really, I know there were other crazy games, and we'll ask you in a second which one you thought was the craziest. But for me, coming back from that many points is just nuts. There shouldn't have been enough time for them to do
Yeah.
that. The Colts had gotten a couple first downs, and I know they lost Jonathan Taylor on his first touch of the game, and that probably harmed them from being able to kind of salt away the lead. But for me, it's that one. What about for you, Paul?
So for me, I'll full disclosure here. I didn't get to watch any games on Saturday. I don't have NFL Network. So of course on Sunday I'm watching the Cowboys game, and in overtime I tend to, that about the only time I ever really drink is during the Cowboys games, and I don't drink like liquor or anything. It's just I drink Trulies, and I don't know how
Okay.
familiar you are with Trulies, but they're like water. So
Yeah, no, I
it's
know.
yeah. So here we are. The Cowboys they get the stop on Jacksonville. So I excuse myself to the restroom. This is an overtime. While I'm in the restroom, I just hear my father-in-law. He goes, "It's over." My wife's like, "Interception." And yeah, my wife yells interception. My father-in-law goes, "Game's over, interception. Nobody's touching him." And so I come out. I see that the Jaguars defender gets the ball off Noah Brown, runs it in for a touchdown. Game over. I didn't really actually get to see it. I didn't really get to see any crazy endings. However, actually, I didn't get to see any crazy endings in real life. But the biggest OMG moment for me was the first time I saw the end of the Raiders Patriots game. Ramondre Stevenson, Jacoby Myers, and oh my
Cameron
goodness,
Jones. Yeah.
Cameron Jones.
Yeah. Well,
What an
it was,
insane, weird ending.
yeah. And there's a lot of blame to go around for that one. And yeah, that I can't think of, there have not been a lot of NFL games that have ended like that, with like a walk-off defensive touchdown. That wasn't like a pick six,
Yeah.
on a play where the offense really shouldn't have been trying to do anything. I mean, they had 3 seconds. They were on their own 45, I think. Why they handed off to begin with is a mystery. You take a knee there, or you throw a Hail Mary. You don't risk a fumble, and that's happened before. There was a Giants game, the Miracle in the Meadowlands in the late 70s, where they had the lead actually, so it was worse, and handed off in the final seconds with the lead, fumbled, and Herman Edwards, future Chiefs coach, scooped it up and ran it in for the win. And it just, to see a Bill Belichick team do something like that, and I know the play call didn't come from him, but the buck stops there, was just stunning. I agree. The end of that game was crazy, but it was tied, so the Raiders might have still won in overtime. But yeah, I was paying attention to that game, and I thought, they 13 points were scored in the last 32 seconds by the Raiders. So I thought the Patriots were going to win that game.
Yeah.
Then I thought it was going to go to overtime, and then I couldn't believe it when it was over. But
So that was a designed called play in that moment.
well, I don't think they called the lateral. I think they just
Okay.
called the run.
Okay.
For some reason, I think when Stevenson lateraled the ball to Myers, Myers was like, "Oh, we got to do this." Like it's one of these jailbreak plays. So if I'm going to get tackled, I got to throw it to someone else. And just sort of lost his sense of where the game was. And then, I mean, to add insult to injury, Chandler Jones catches the lateral and then face plants Mac Jones and runs right over
So
him.
bad. Yeah.
and takes it into the end zone. And look, that might cost them a playoff
The
spot.
playoff.
I mean,
Yeah.
that was important. So that's going to segue to our next question, Paul. So we got a lot of teams jockeying for playoff position in both conferences.
Yep.
And a lot of contenders for playoff spots lost this past week. So kind of tightening things up in both conferences. So for the AFC, and I'll give you the top 7 right now. So right now, the 7 teams that would make the playoffs if the season ended today, the division winners would be the Bills, Chiefs, Bengals, and Titans. And the wild cards would be the Ravens, Chargers, and Dolphins. So give me your prediction of those 7 teams that are in the playoffs if it ended today. Who's the most likely to end up on the outside looking in? And of the teams that are not in those 7, again, we're just talking about the AFC, who's got the best chance of crashing the party?
Okay, so what I have here on the sheet, this was before I was doing research on my article and writing my article. But before researching, the team I think won't make it or thought it would make it would be the Titans, and the team that is out that I thought would make it is the Jags. But now I was looking at their schedules earlier, and I have a feeling, I don't know why, the way Miami's playing, they've had a tough schedule. It doesn't get much easier. I have a feeling Miami might miss the playoffs as the team that's still in, being Miami missing the playoffs. And I still think the Jags will sneak in there.
So it's me crying about the Dolphins. So
I hope not, Dave, but man, that's just kind of where I'm at.
So you have the Jags making it, but not as a division winner.
No, as a wild card.
As a wild card, okay.
Well, you know what? They could win that division still.
Well, and that's what my pick is, and I hear you on the Dolphins. It's been a weird season for them. They won 3, lost 3, won 5, and then lost 3. It's been like streak after streak. They impressed me this week. I know they didn't get a win, and there's sort of no moral victories when you need to win games to make the playoffs. But I thought they played pretty well against the Bills, played pretty hard. I actually thought, they had a really good chance to win that game and then just couldn't keep the ball away from Josh Allen. And I think the snow made it a little harder for them at the end for the way they run their offense. They don't have a quarterback that can just, throw it 60 miles an hour or run you over. But in any case, a big game for them. All 3 are big, and they finish with the Packers, the Patriots, and the Jets. None of those are easy games. None of them are impossible games either. So we'll see.
No.
I mean, my answer for this is the Jaguars. Same answer as you, but for me, it's the Titans missing out. And I know, they play the Texans this week, so. I mean, the Texans the last 2 weeks have given the Cowboys and the Chiefs fits.
Yeah.
But Derrick Henry's had 200 yards against them 4 straight times. I just think it's a bad matchup for the Texans. They can't stop the run, and that's what the Titans do so well. So assuming they win that game, I do think it'll come down to they have a 1-game lead right now, and they play the Jaguars the last week of the season in Jacksonville. I think those teams will still be either tied or 1 game apart, so that whoever wins that game is going to win the division, because Jacksonville beat them the first time. So if Jacksonville's 1 game back and they beat them, that would be a sweep and they'd win the tiebreaker. And for me, the Titans are, Tannehill's hurt now. Probably not going to play this week. I still think they'll win this week. I just don't have I have a lot of confidence in Mike Vrabel and how he coaches, but I don't have a lot of confidence in them winning against the Jaguars in a must-win Week 18. So that's my answer for that one.
If it goes down to week 18, and that is the scenario where the winner gets into the playoffs, wins the division, if Mike Vrabel can win that game with Malik Willis, that'd be pretty impressive.
Yeah, well, maybe Tannehill will be back by then. We'll have to see. But yes, I would agree with that.
I saw an article. I didn't actually read it. I didn't have time, but it mentioned something about Malik Willis getting an opportunity to showcase his skills for the future. So I didn't, I took that and kind of implied to me that maybe Tannehill's not coming back this season.
That could be. I mean, the first time Tannehill missed time was the game against the Chiefs. And if you remember that game, the Titans didn't throw the ball. Somehow they stayed in the game with the Chiefs, but the differential in pass attempts was like one of the biggest in history. It was something like the Titans attempted like 15 passes or maybe even less, and the Chiefs attempted like 50. So I don't know that they trust Malik Willis to throw the ball. We'll see. I mean, I guess if he's going to play more games, he's going to have to. So
I remember watching that game. I didn't mean to cut you off, Dave. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I remember watching that game, and they didn't throw the ball very well or very often. But when Malik Willis did make good throws, his receivers didn't do him any favors. There was a few drops in there that were big plays.
Yeah, I remember that his first completion was for like 50 yards to one of their tight ends. I forget which one. And then for the rest of the game, he had like 30 yards of pass. So we'll see.
Yeah, you never know. All right, Dave, we're talking about the AFC playoff picture. Let's talk about the NFC. Which team, kind of the same question here, but which team that's currently in do you think will be out by the time the playoffs start, and which team out do you think will be in?
All right, so I've thought about this one, and I really think it comes down to the NFC's kind of locked up, I think, for the most part, other than who's going to win the NFC South, and in all likelihood, who's going to get the last wild card. And so for me, I've got the Lions, who right now are not one of the 7. They're on the outside looking in. I've got them passing the Commanders, making the playoffs, while the Commanders, who today would be the last wild card, and really passing the Commanders and the Seahawks. And I've got the Lions. I just think the Lions, it's hard to believe this team was 1-6, but
I know
they've won 6 of their last 7, and the one they lost was against the Bills on Thanksgiving, and it's a game they really could have and should have won. Maybe not should have, but certainly could have. I mean, they were right there at the end of the game. I think they're a team. I know they play indoors, but I think they're built better for cold weather than most teams in the NFC. They have a punishing offensive line. They got 2 running backs that are tough to deal with, and they can pound the ball. And their run defense has gotten a lot better in recent weeks. I have a lot of. I think that team's on a good roll, and I don't think the Commanders are that good, or the Seahawks. And if you look at the schedules of the 3 teams, they're all kind of. Nobody has a real easy schedule, and nobody has a real hard schedule. The Lions, they finish at Green Bay. And like I said, if that's a cold game in Lambeau, I like the Lions. In a sort of pounded out, freezing cold game, if it's like that, more than I like the Packers. So that's my answer. What about you?
That's an interesting one. Yeah, for me, I was, again, looking at the schedule, doing some research for the article and everything, and I actually believe I have it the exact same as you. I don't really believe in the Commanders. I like their defense. Taylor Heineke's a good story, but overall, I just don't think they have a good enough team to finish it out to do what needs to be done to make the playoffs. You look at Detroit; they've won, like you mentioned, they've won 6 of their last 7. They've got a good offense. Their defense has turned a corner, and I just think they're a better overall team. I was kind of hoping the Seahawks might sneak in there, just because they're a good story. Geno Smith, and I like the DK Metcalf, but they lose Tyler Lockett. And I don't know, maybe Geno Smith is kind of showing his true colors now that we're at this point in the season. But of all the teams on the outside looking in, I do think the Lions are the best.
Yeah, and if you look at the schedule just for this week, so they're all 3 are on the road. The Lions are in Carolina. The Seahawks are in Kansas City, and the Commanders are in San Francisco. So at least for this week, the Lions have by far the easiest of those 3 games and the best chance of getting a leg up. And so I think that's it. If it plays out that way, the Lions could lose to the Panthers, but if the Lions were to win this week and those other two teams were to lose, then they would be, at least for now, the team in the playoffs. And I think there's a little bit of a psychological advantage to be the team that doesn't need help to get to the playoffs.
Oh, yeah.
Versus the teams that do need other teams to lose and are scoreboard watching. So I think, if it works out that way this weekend, and look, you can't take anything for granted. And the Texans have proven that the last 2 weeks, with how they took supposedly two of the best teams in the NFL to the end of the game, and they are a 1-win team. But if it does work out that way, I think it's going to be an advantage for the Lions to be one up on those two teams. So I guess in the case of the Commanders, they'd be up a tie, a win versus a tie. Okay, let's keep talking about the NFL. So there were a lot of impressive performances in Week 15, and some teams that really needed a win got one. And there were some teams that really needed a win that didn't get one. What do you think was the most consequential win of the week?
Dave, we just got done talking about this team, but Detroit winning was the most consequential for me. They're right there in the thick of things, and their win puts them in a tie with Seattle and Washington, and what looks to be a three-way tie as it is today. I feel like if Detroit wins this week and both Seattle and Washington lose, again, we're going to see Detroit would be the 7th seed heading into Week 17. So I felt like that was maybe the most consequential win of the week for me.
Their win over you're saying their win over the Jets last week. Yeah.
Yes.
Which was
that was a good win.
I was just going to say, like, I had that game on because I'm in New York, and that's, one of the games we get. And that game could have gone either way. And that's the exact kind of game the Lions have lost, hundreds of times, it feels like, over the last 5 years. Yeah. It's also the kind of game the Jets have lost. And the Jets, like, they lost that game to New England on a punt return at the end of the game. The Lions got a punt return in this game, which obviously, this was a 1-score game. So those were very consequential points. And they busted a big play to a tight end, at the end of the game against a very stingy defense. So I agree that was a very consequential win. I'm going to stay in New York for my answer to this, because I think the Giants beating the Commanders for me was the most consequential win of the week, because it kind of put them really, like, whoever won that game was going to kind of have a pretty commanding advantage over the rest of the NFC wild card hopefuls. They were going to be up a game and a half at least on Seattle and Detroit, right, who had already gotten to 7-7. So whoever won that Giants Commanders game was going to be 8-5-1, and whoever lost it was going to be 7-6-1. Yeah. And for the Giants, there was a big advantage for the Commanders because they played the Giants twice in a row with a bye week in between. So they got to rest, and they didn't have to prepare for anyone different in between. The Giants played that tie against the Commanders, then they got shellacked by the Eagles, who they had to prepare for. And then, a week after getting their butts kicked, they had to go down to Washington and play a team they had just played. And I thought the Giants played a pretty complete game. Kayvon Thibodeau was everywhere. He was a game wrecker, which is, what you want out of your 5th overall pick in the draft. They got 2 strip sacks. Dexter Lawrence got the other one. Thibodeau got the first one. Came down to the last possession. The Commanders had the ball on the 1. The Giants got a couple of fortunate calls from the refs, and they escaped with a win. And I thought that was huge for them. So for me, that's the most consequential win of the week. But I hear you on the Lions because that was a huge win for them also, to keep the momentum going and keep them in the playoff hunt. So let's stay in the NFC, because I was just talking about an NFC game. A question that will that historians will be pondering for a consequential question: who's going to win the NFC South? This is the worst division we've seen in a long time. Who's your
Yeah.
pick?
I want it so bad to be the Panthers, but they've got a tough schedule with Detroit, Tampa, and New Orleans still to play. We're looking at Tampa Bay. They lose, man. They got embarrassed Sunday afternoon by the Bengals. Yet they're still atop the NFC South, and they have to face Arizona, Carolina, and Atlanta to finish the season. Just based on the schedule, and I look at Tampa Bay. I mean, even with as bad as they looked on Sunday against Cincinnati, they're still better than Carolina, especially at the quarterback position. So, and not to mention their experience. They're 2 years removed from winning that Super Bowl. I feel like their experience, their quarterback, is what separates them in this division.
Yeah, we're going to agree again, Paul, because my answer is
Okay.
also the Bucks, and the main reason it's my answer is because they're one game ahead right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think none of these, I don't think any of these teams are going to necessarily even win 2 out of 3. The Bucks go to Arizona this week. Not only is Kyler Murray done for the season, but Colt McCoy's out. So Trace McSorley gets the start for the Cardinals. And this is a game the Bucks have to have, and
Yeah.
you would think, and again, we can look at any of these matchups and you can't pencil in wins in the NFL. But that said, I think that this is a game the Bucks should win. They played well for a half last week and then they fell apart. I don't think that'll happen again. And I think, they'll get a win this week and then they play 2 division games to finish the season. And I just don't think anyone in this division is good enough to forget winning their last 3 to even win 2 out of their last 3.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I've said this for like a month that the Bucks are going to win this division by default. And I think they will. And then in all likelihood, they're going to play the Cowboys in the first round of the playoffs. And, I think everyone's fear of teams that are going to go against the Bucks is that's when sort of all of a sudden Brady's going to be Brady again. And,
Exactly.
With the weapons he has, he'll be picking apart defenses. And I just don't know. I mean, I've watched this team a lot this year and they just haven't been good. They're not a good football team. They're not well coached.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're not protecting Brady. Brady looks frustrated. I don't know where Mike Evans has disappeared to, but they're not connecting at all. And, they combined for like 27 touchdowns Brady's first 2 years. So I don't know what's happened there. But anyway, all right. I think it is time to shift to fantasy football if you're ready.
Hey, I'm always ready to talk some fantasy, Dave.
Right. So we're at the point in the season where for a lot of people, it's playoffs right now. And for some leagues do like a 2-week combined score and then other leagues do it differently. Some leagues play all the way to the end of the season, their playoffs. I'm in a league where we don't even do the playoffs till after the season. We do them during the playoffs, and that's complex. So I'm not even going to explain how we do that. But fantasy's kind of winding down. So the first thing I wanted to ask you is, as you think back on this season and how it went for you and what your draft strategy was and your waiver strategy and all of that, what are the lessons learned for you and generally for fantasy managers from the 2022 season, which I think every year we think, oh, this was a crazy season. There were a lot of injuries and there were a lot of players who surprised and, there were some players that fell off the table, but that happens every year. Every year is unpredictable. If it wasn't, then drafting would be easy, right?
Exactly.
Like if we knew that ADP was or expert consensus rankings were actually accurate and that's how players were going to finish, then it would be easy and it wouldn't be that much fun, right? Because the whole thing is to try to get players who are undervalued and to avoid players who are overvalued, and to build a team that's better that way. So I don't think this year was all that different from any others, but the question I have for you is, what did you learn? What are the lessons learned?
So, Dave, I will say I don't play a lot of redraft. Let me rephrase. I don't play in a lot of redraft leagues. However, I do play in quite a few best ball leagues. So it's kind of similar, right? Because it's not a dynasty league. One thing I did learn this year, especially, is elite tight ends, man, they are what separate good teams from great teams. If you have an elite tight end like a Travis Kelce, I mean, Travis Kelce, he'll win you your week by himself. If you need you need 20 points and Travis Kelce's your only player you have left, you're feeling pretty confident that you're going to win that matchup, right?
Yeah.
Another thing I learned is as much as I like rookies, as exciting as it is to do for the whole draft process, and you hear the training camp reports and everything. Don't base your redraft league on like rookies, or don't focus on the age or sexy names. Draft proven players, and don't build your redraft teams around rookie guys.
Wisdom, good lessons, Paul.
Yeah, appreciate it. I've learned a thing or two.
Yeah. I mean, thinking about the rookies, we'll talk about I want to talk a little later in the show about the rookie class of wide receivers. I mean, I think, look, if Breece Hall was on his way to really being a difference maker. So I think there are some rookies. I mean, rookie tight ends almost never, but at the running back position in particular, and Ken Walker also, and Dameon Pierce, rookies seem kind of ready to go at running back, because I don't think it's different between college and the NFL game. And I think, running backs kind of peak so early before they get a lot of miles on them. Between high school and college, they've already carried the ball a lot and been hit a lot and put a lot of stress on their knees and everything else. But I hear what you're saying, and especially, quarterbacks. We've seen the last 2 years, really the last 3 years, other than Justin Herbert and Burrow for part of his rookie season, rookie QBs are almost never like startable in a 1 QB league.
Yeah.
So for my lessons learned, and since I just mentioned quarterbacks, I was one of the biggest and loudest proponents preseason of wait on quarterback, that like this was the year of all years where the QB position was so deep with quality, like 12 players deep, with guys that I thought were all kind of like quality QB1s, that this was really the year you could just, load up on running backs and wide receivers. If you're in a typical snake draft, I do mostly, my main league is an auction draft, but it's the same concept, that you're not going to spend a lot of draft capital on a quarterback, because they're easy to get. But this year really proved that wrong. If you look at the top 3 scorers in fantasy football this year, which are Jalen Hurts, Mahomes, and Josh Allen, I don't even know who's 2 or who's 3. It doesn't matter. The 3 of them, and then Joe Burrow right behind them, and then a little ways back, I guess. Well, Justin Fields, but I'll put him aside because I don't think people were really drafting him to be a QB1, and he really just kind of exploded in the second half of the season. And Justin Herbert, has kind of come on of late. But, the difference between those top QBs and, then there were a bunch of guys that everyone thought you could just wait and get Brady or Rodgers or Dak or Russell Wilson or Matt Stafford. It was kind of like those 5.
Yeah.
And those 5, I mean, granted, Stafford got hurt, Dak got hurt for a bunch of weeks, but none of those 5 has been a top even like 14 QB this year. Guys like Derek Carr and Kirk Cousins and Tua and Trevor Lawrence have all been, for the most part, better than those guys and scored more fantasy points. And obviously that's hard to predict, but I think if you waited and grabbed one of those guys, you were hurting at the position. And so going into next year, and every year is different, and maybe I'll feel differently about this in August, but I do think, and I didn't mention Lamar Jackson because he got hurt also, and he was kind of putting up numbers that weren't great for him, but that were still pretty decent QB1 numbers. But I think, I've rethought the whole, 0 QB, wait on QB, just take one late. They're all the same. I really don't think that's true. And the running QBs in particular just give you such a higher floor week to week. And if you had one of those guys like Hurts or Mahomes or Josh Allen, you're just starting with such a higher score every week than whoever you're playing, or if you're not in a head-to-head league, just than everyone else. So that was my biggest lesson from this year, and I think my biggest whiff in terms of giving people fantasy advice during draft season, because I was telling anyone who would listen, wait on QB, and I think it was a mistake this year. The other one I had, another one I had was one that you mentioned, which is that Travis Kelce is worth a first-round draft pick.
Oh yeah.
As you mentioned, elite tight ends, and I know Mark Andrews got hurt this year, but Kelsey's the only one. If you look at fantasy points scored this year in half PPR, he's somewhere around like 235 or something like that, which is, not an all-time tight end season, but it's like top 10 probably all time. So he's having another really good year. And then like the person behind him is Mark Andrews. I think he's number 2, and then TJ Hawkinson, and they have half as many points, like literally like just a tiny bit more than half the points. So it's a huge positional advantage.
Yeah.
And obviously, I think Andrews would have had a better season if he didn't get hurt and if Lamar didn't get hurt.
Yeah.
But if you took Kelce, you got such a big advantage over everyone else. And I know every year people are thinking like, all right, he's 30, 31, 32, 33. How can he keep doing this? But he shows no signs of slowing down. And Tyreek Hill leaving that team only made him better, or at least he didn't, he gets maybe a little bit more touchdowns with Tyreek not there. So that's the other lesson learned. Now, obviously, everyone can't draft Travis Kelce, but if you took him late in the first round this year or very early in the second, you got really good value, because if you're in a league where you have to start at tight end, there's just a huge drop off from him to the rest of the position. I think the last one I'll mention is that the stud receivers, like the really top guys, are a little more reliable than the really top running backs. Although this year, most of the really top running backs, actually, other than Jonathan Taylor, stayed healthy and kind of delivered on value. I'm thinking about like Christian McCaffrey and Derrick Henry and Austin Eckler, Saquon Barkley. None of them have had like ridiculous seasons. McCaffrey's starting to get there recently, but they've all had really good seasons and they've stayed healthy and were worth first round draft picks. But I think like the really elite receivers, and Cooper Kupp got hurt, but if you look at like Jefferson and Diggs and Adams, Tyreek Hill, they're all right there and deliver that value. So that was one of the other things that I think I sort of got right in the preseason, is I was telling people like draft Justin Jefferson or Cooper Kupp in the first round. They're surer things than the top running backs. Or even Stephon Diggs if you're around the turn, or Devontae Adams. And I know Adams and Hill were changing teams, so there was a little bit of, and I'll throw Jamar Chase in there too. I forgot to mention him before. But I still think it's safer to take an elite receiver, a truly elite receiver in the first round than a running back. Just because they get hurt less and they seem to always deliver, over the course of a season. So those are my lessons learned.
You mentioned Jamar Chase. I think Joe Burrow has shown himself to be the next elite quarterback in fantasy as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think, and he's got good weapons, and he's in a good situation. So I think you're right.
Yes, sir. So, Dave, another thing we look at in fantasy, it's sometimes anytime you can find that advantage, you take advantage of that advantage, obviously. Is there anything that you're looking for this week in the playoffs, like the bigger picture and any of these matchups heading into this week that might give you an advantage over your opponent in the playoffs?
As I was looking at this week, and again, we've got like the games strung out over 4 days. So I think for people who are in playoff matchups, it's going to be kind of excruciating, right? Because,
Mm-hmm.
Usually there's one game on Thursday, one game on Monday, and pretty much everything is on Sunday. And you kind of you know, at the end of Sunday, if you're going to win or if you have a good chance of winning that week's matchup. And I think this week is going to be a little excruciating for people because there's a lot of games on Saturday, but then there's still 3 on Sunday, 1 on Monday. So, depending on when your best players are going, there's going to be a lot of like, it's sort of like voting with early voting and when they count the votes, like people who are ahead but know that the other person they're playing has better players to go later in what's a long kind of wraparound weekend.
Mm-hmm.
I feel bad for people who have Jalen Hurts, and I'll tell you why. I mean, he's the number one scorer in fantasy. You kind of ride him all year, and now you're
Yeah.
in the playoffs, and suddenly, this guy that you were riding to a title is suddenly, and look, it might be that he still plays, but all signs are that he's likely to miss this game. And if you're Philadelphia with really not much to play for at this point, if he's got a hurt shoulder, like a sprained shoulder, why would you play him?
Right.
You don't
Exactly.
you don't need the game against the Cowboys. And it would be sort of funny because when the Cowboys played him the first time, they didn't have Dak Prescott, right? And then this time the Eagles would be without their quarterback. So we won't have seen these teams. If they ever meet in the playoffs, we won't have seen them both with their starting quarterbacks playing each other. But that's like there's nothing to prepare for. I mean, if you have Hurts, you got to find another quarterback this week. It could be
Yeah.
Gardner too, or it could be, maybe you have a good backup that you've been carrying all year. I suspect that a decent number of Hurts managers picked up Minshew at some point, and just that's their backup.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I would watch for is weather, and weather really hasn't been a factor very much so far this year.
Mm-hmm.
It was a factor in week 1 of all things when the Bears played the 49ers in that monsoon. It's kind of funny that the Bears, who have 3
Yeah.
wins, beat the 49ers who've won 7 in a row. But
I know, man.
it's when you play teams sometimes. But weather
Exactly.
is going to be a big factor this weekend, and it's something that I think fantasy managers have to worry about because there are something like 6 or 7 games as far south as Carolina and Tennessee that are going to have frigid temperatures. And it's going to be especially bad in Chicago, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and maybe Baltimore also. And these are going to be games with very cold temperatures and maybe a decent amount of wind also. And that could make, if you've got a kicker in one of these games, when it's really cold like that, like the ball's like a rock, and it
Oh.
doesn't travel very well. And if it's windy,
Mm-hmm.
if if you could pick if you have a kicker that you've been riding all year and you're worried about that, you could try to pick
Yeah.
up one of the dome kickers or warmer weather kickers for this weekend. I think that Bears Bills game could be pretty dicey for the passing game of Buffalo, which a lot of people have, been riding a lot.
Yeah.
The Bears just run it all the time anyway. But so I think you sort of would like to think that everything is just a level playing field, but I think those are a couple of things having nothing to do with the matchups and the players that fantasy managers are going to have to worry about this weekend. What about you, Paul? Or what are your sort of big picture fantasy thoughts for Week 16?
You hit the weather thing right there on the head. No, you hit the you hit the weather thing. I'm at a loss for words here, Dave. Forgive me, but
Well,
outside of that, outside of the weather thing, I don't really have much. I would say I would temper my expectations on players like Drake London, DeAndre Hopkins, and Denver receivers. Those teams are either playing with backup quarterbacks, they have a rookie quarterback playing, or it sounds like they're going to try to. Russell Wilson's going to try to come back from an injury he missed last week, but even when he was playing, he hasn't been 100%. I don't know. Just trying to. I know that. I don't know how many better options you have, but I just if you have something out there, maybe a Hail Mary guy, maybe like a Jameson Williams who you've been reluctant to start, who didn't do much last week. I would consider plugging him over any of those guys. It's just I think the weather thing is the biggest factor into like having the biggest effect on games. Outside of that, I couldn't really find anything.
Yeah, and it's tough for fantasy managers because for anyone who's still playing, like your season's on the line this week, right? So you just
Yeah.
want to, you want to go with your best players, and you kind of want to go with who brung you, as they say, right? The players you kind of rode to get here, but there are going to be situations, and you mentioned a couple of them, where it's going to be hard to trust certain players given either the weather or who their quarterback is this week. And look, I mean, if Gardner Minshew plays, you're playing AJ Brown, right? Like you're not. I mean, Gardner Minshew happens to be one of the better backups in the NFL, and a guy who has supported fantasy receivers before. Like I think that's not that bad of a situation. And he'll run less than Jalen Hurts, which means they might throw more.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some situations, this week where I think fantasy managers are going to think long and hard about starting guys that they've been starting all year, or that, on paper have a better matchup. The other thing is that, the flip side of this is you don't want to get too cute, right? Like
Right.
there's nothing worse than benching a guy because you think it's a bad matchup or bad weather, or because it's a backup quarterback, and then they go off and you're saying to yourself, why am I such an idiot? Why didn't I play DeAndre Hopkins? He's DeAndre Hopkins. I don't care if it's Trace McSorley. If I'm Trace McSorley and I have DeAndre Hopkins, I'm throwing it to him every time.
Yeah.
So it can work the other way. And those are the kind of decisions that, are going to end up deciding fantasy championships. And it's, kind of the risk of deciding your championship in week 16 is you could have a week with bad weather. It's December.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
we'll see how that all plays out. Another fantasy question for you. So who are your top performers, or who you're predicting as your top performers for the coming week?
So I was looking at it, Dave, and one player that might not be so obvious, but has proven so in the past. I'm looking at this matchup. They have the number one seed locked up. Jalen Hurts is not going to be playing this week, and the Eagles, they don't have that added motivation of ruining the playoff hopes for the Dallas Cowboys. I feel like Dak Prescott is going to be the number one fantasy quarterback this week, and playing a Philadelphia Eagles team who might, be a little bit more relaxed than usual. Knowing that they have no nothing to really play for. They want to kind of just want to stay healthy. And then I look at Miami. We touched on them a bit, but I like the matchup with Miami and Green Bay. After a big 15-week, Raheem Mostert, I think a lot of people were wondering why he didn't get the ball more. That the outcome of that game might have been different. But I think Raheem Mostert, and what is going to be a competitive game, a high-scoring game, I wouldn't be surprised to see him as a top five, dare I say, top three scoring running back this week when you factor in all the weather concerns for some of the matchups over the weekend.
Yeah,
And then
I
last
think.
but
Go ahead. Go ahead. I was just going to say I like that one because Green Bay has really struggled against the run at times this year. But go ahead, give your last one.
yes, sir. And then another good matchup, Detroit and Carolina is another interesting matchup. We've seen Detroit playing a lot of shootouts this year. I think that game's gonna score a lot of points, and I like DJ Moore this week as a top, at least if not a top 5 receiver, at least a top 10 receiver this week. With him and Sam Darnold have proven to still have that chemistry that they had last year.
Yeah, he did have. I don't know if it was last week or the week before where he had no catches. I think it was 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit concerning. But the Lions, for the most part this year, have been pretty generous. A pretty generous defense to receivers. So I like all of those calls. I mean, for me, the obvious answer is Derrick Henry, and
Mm-hmm.
like I said, he's got 4 straight 200-yard games um, against uh, against the Texans, and Christian McCaffrey is a very obvious name for me at this point too, just because it's kind of clear they're trying to keep it simple for Brock Purdy.
Right.
Um, and last week I think they ran 61 plays and 34 of them were either handoffs to McCaffrey or passes targeted to him. So
Mm.
I just think that they don't want to mess it up and they don't want Purdy doing too much. And there was a decent amount of Kittle sprinkled in last week too. But I mean they're very obvious names. So I'm not breaking any ground here. Anyone who has McCaffrey and Henry are playing them. But I think when the week's over, if they're the top 2 scoring players at any position, I won't be surprised. I like the entire Charger passing game this week at
Oh yeah.
Indianapolis. The Colts. I sort of feel like after what happened to them in that game last week, I don't know what they're going to have left. And the Chargers are on a roll. They need this game. They kind of didn't really get their offense going as much against the Titans last week as I thought they would. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the Colts defense played very well for a half last week and then completely fell apart and, gave up, like in the second half, they gave up more than 300 yards passing and
Ouch.
four passing touchdowns. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so I think Justin Herbert, Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, I think all of them are going to have or could be in line for very big days this week. So those are and one more. If Lamar's back, I like Mark Andrews to get it going again this week. Now they're without Devin Duvernay also, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and their offense has been a really like plodding, kind of just run the ball on every play, and I don't think the Falcons are a team you can throw on and run on. But I think if Lamar's back, I think they'll want to get back to some of what they do well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they need to get Andrews more involved. He really has not done much the last couple of weeks, as anyone who's a Mark Andrews manager will tell you. So he's another one I think could sort of get back to his winning ways this week.
I would like to see that Baltimore offense with a healthy J.K. Dobbins, Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, and we've seen Demarcus Robinson. He's had a couple of big games with the Ravens. He could be a nice second option behind Mark Andrews. J.K. Dobbins could take some pressure off of Lamar and maybe help keep linebackers honest. So it would be nice to see him. And for Lamar's sake, he's missed 8 straight practices, so I'd be shocked if he did come back this week. As much as I'm in a super flex league and he was my number 1 quarterback. So I've been thankful to get to the playoffs and then win my first matchup without him, thanks to Trevor Lawrence. But man, I don't see him playing, and I don't know. It seems like the Ravens have a not necessarily guaranteed, but their spot doesn't seem to really be in danger. Their playoff spot doesn't seem to be in danger. So if anything, I could see them trying to keep him off the field until like week 18 if it was like in a must-win situation.
Yeah, they've gotten lucky that the Dolphins, Patriots, and Jets have kind of been losing, a
Yeah,
decent
for
amount
sure.
over the last few weeks
Mm-hmm.
because they should be under pressure,
Yeah,
you
they
know,
should.
but they really haven't been because no one has, kind of flagged them down other than the Chargers.
Yeah.
Um, and there are 3 wild cards, so they still only have 5 losses, and all those other teams have 6 or 7. And the Raven, it's the last 3 weeks with Huntley playing, they've only scored 29 points in 3
I
games, which,
know. Yeah.
it's tough to win and their defense is playing really well.
Mm-hmm.
But it's tough to win when you can't score. And
Yeah.
they should be a team that you'd be worried about making the playoffs, but their schedule is pretty easy to finish the season. And they, they're 9-5, so they're still kind of in the driver's seat there. When Lamar first got hurt, And the reason I said that I think he might be back this week is, they were originally saying they expected him back. They were targeting the Christmas Eve game. But as you said, he hasn't practiced. And this is kind of what happened last year when he got hurt towards the end of the season. They kept saying, well, maybe next week. And then it was clear they weren't going to make the playoffs on the last week. So then I think they just sat him. He might have been ready. So we'll see. I guess we'll learn more in the next, the practice reports on Thursday and Friday will be kind of critical.
Right. Yes, they will. So, Dave, you write a waiver wire article every week. This week is as important as ever. Who are your top waiver wire pickups?
Yeah, so waivers are interesting in this time of year because for most of the year, you look at the waiver wire and you're looking for long-term, guys who can help you long-term or that you might want to stash who might, in a few weeks suddenly emerge. And at this time of year, teams that are still playing have a pretty set lineup and roster. And if you're looking to add anyone, you're really just looking for this week. But with like the weather concerns and other things, and with some recent injuries, there could be teams looking for players. I mean, if Jerick McKinnon is available on a waiver wire, he's obviously the last 2 weeks just blown up and seems to be kind of carving a bigger role in that backfield. And certainly like their screen game has come alive. He's catching a lot of passes and doing a lot with them. Jahan Dotson, I mean, I don't love the matchup this week against San Francisco, but he looked really good against the Giants. And if he's available, even if you're not going to start him this week, there's still the week after if you're, in a league that goes to week 17 for your championship. So he's a guy I like, and he's available in some leagues. Beyond that, if you're stuck at quarterback, I know Brock Purdy is still available in a bunch of leagues, and he is not spectacular. He's not going to give you a monster game. And San Francisco, when they get a lead, they kind of keep it, they're not going to try to run it up, and they're not going to throw a lot with a lead. But he's played 3 games, the one where he came in for Garoppolo, and then the 2 he started. He's thrown 2 TDs in each one, and plus he ran one in. So he's scoring good fantasy points. And if you're stuck at QB and he's available, I think he's a viable pickup. And the matchup this week at home against the Commanders is a decent one, and weather won't be an issue there.
Yeah.
And 2 other names I'll mention are Tyler Algier, who I think, with Caleb Huntley going down, now it's just him and Cordero Patterson, and he got more carries last week than Patterson, and really ran well against a good run defense. I know they're playing the Ravens this week, who've been a really good run defense since they got Roquan Smith. But I think he's a guy if you need to plug in a running back, and he's available in a number of leagues. And if you're stuck at receiver, I wrote about this in my column, Marquise Goodwin on the Seahawks it's going to be freezing cold, but they have a good matchup at Kansas City, and with Tyler Lockett out for this one, I think he's a viable plug and play as a flex if you need him. You got any waiver thoughts for this week?
No, it's looking pretty ugly on the waiver wire. You touched on that, especially at this point in the season. You took all the good ones. I was really impressed with Tyler Algier last week, but you mentioned the matchup, the Falcons versus the Ravens there. I don't really care for that, which kind of stinks because I was looking forward to see what Desmond Ridder would look like. I know that I mentioned that's Drake London, somebody you wouldn't want to start, but I just kind of wanted to see how much better or maybe just different the offense looked as opposed to with Marcus Mariota. But we probably won't see that this week. He didn't look very good in his first start, but again, New Orleans has a tough secondary, still a good defense regardless of their offense. But I was looking at Gardner Minshew, maybe just for superflex leagues. We know Philadelphia, they've got A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert supposed to be coming back, Miles Sanders. And Gardner Minshew, I mean, his first year when he started with the with the Jaguars. I mean, they put up some good numbers. I believe that
Yeah.
was still at the time DJ Chark's best season of his career was with Gardner Minshew. So I see him as an interesting pickup this week.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. I'm glad you mentioned him because I do think that that if you're stuck, especially if you're a Hurts manager and there's no one on the waiver wire,
Yeah,
because again, there's a lot of games where you might not want to pick up a quarterback who's going to be playing in 9-degree weather, but that's not going to be an issue in Dallas. There's like half the games this week are either indoors or in places that won't be freezing.
yeah.
So
I did also see that Nick Foles was going to be starting. I can't remember who the Colts are matching up with this week, but if you're in a pinch, if you're in a super flex league and Lamar's not coming back and your flex isn't really very appealing, you're dealing with some guys in those weather games, depending on the matchup, he might be worth the Hail Mary type play.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the Chargers. It's the Chargers and the Colts, right? Is that what the matchup is? Oh,
yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I didn't see that. I just assumed Matt Ryan was starting forever.
Yeah, it doesn't look like that. That could have been a joke. I could have, maybe I've been duped, but I did see that there on Twitter.
Okay, all right, I'll take a look at that. So I know we're kind of getting close to the end here, so I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we'll do our bold takes.
Yes, sir.
A lot of this year's rookie receiver class I've been really impressed with. And last year you had Jamar Chase and Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Elijah Moore showed out for a little while. A top-heavy class, but obviously some big stars in that class, or stars to be, at least in Chase and Waddle, and probably Smith eventually, and Amon-Ra. But this year's class has really, it hasn't been the whole season for any of them, and it's generally not been their fault. It's been because quarterbacks have been injured or bad, or they're on teams that don't throw, or they've gotten hurt. Right. But, between Wilson and Watson and Olave and Burks and Dotson, London at times, it's been a very good showing, I think.
Oh, yeah.
My question for you is, if over the next 2 years, which one of these rookie wide receivers, knowing what you know today about the situations they're in, which obviously for a lot of these guys can change in terms of who their quarterbacks are.
Right.
Which one of these rookie receivers, if you're thinking like about dynasty, which one of these rookie wide receivers do you think is going to score the most fantasy points over the next 2 seasons combined?
So, Dave, I was thinking about this question a lot. And what's interesting about these receivers is we've all seen them kind of hit at different points in the season. Jahan Dotson had a strong start to the season. Of course, we saw Garrett Wilson have a stretch where he was, putting up wide receiver 1 week. Right, exactly. Yeah. And then we even saw Chris Olave with Andy Dalton. He had some weeks. Treylon Burks showed some things before he got injured, and then I believe he went out with a concussion, but he even has a 100-yard game. We saw Drake London hit. Jameson Williams, he comes back. His first game, he has a long touchdown. He almost had another one last week. But the guy who I think is a difference maker, who's shown he's a difference maker, who I think is going to be in his own tier in two years from now, I believe we'll be talking about him as a top 12 receiver in the league. I'm going with Christian Watson. Aaron Rodgers still has something there in the tank. I know he's had an up and down season, but their chemistry is undeniable. And we even saw when Jordan Love, when he had to come in the game against the Eagles, immediately him and Christian Watson hit. And I believe on the second play of Jordan Love's coming in for Aaron Rodgers, he goes for a long touchdown. Just Christian Watson, I think he's a superstar in the making.
Yeah, he's my answer too for kind of all the reasons you said, and Aaron Rodgers is part of it too, because he's under contract in Green Bay. He's likely going to be there those next 2 years, and he's had an up and down year, like you said, but he's still better than any of these other quarterbacks we're talking about who are throwing the ball to these other guys. And the other thing I'll mention is Christian Watson in like half a season played, he has 2 rushing touchdowns. And
Mm.
so I think that just if you thinking about fantasy points, he's the type of guy who's going to get them in multiple ways. I don't know that he'll get that many rushing touchdowns. They usually only give him 1 or 2 carries a game, and he didn't have any this week. But they do, run occasional sweeps to him, and he's just so fast that, I mean, I don't know if you saw the 46-yard touchdown run he had against the Bears last week. But as soon as he got like 3 yards past the line of scrimmage, it was over.
Yeah.
He just like got to the outside, and it looked like Randy Moss when they used to run those kind of plays to him. Watson is deceptively fast. I mean, he's tall, which is also a plus. He still makes rookie mistakes, like that play
Of
at the end of
course.
the game. Like, he didn't see the signal and probably would have had an easy touchdown at the very end of the Ram game on Monday night. But he's my answer. He's my answer also. I think a number of these rookie receivers are going to be very good over the next 2 years. I've really been impressed with Garrett Wilson. But if Zach Wilson's the quarterback, then it's hard to,
Right.
which I don't think he will be. But I've really been impressed with Garrett Wilson, his route running, guy looks open, like when he's open, he's open. And Olave is very smooth too. So I think it's going to be a good class that's going to, we're all going to be drafting these guys a lot over the next few years.
It'll be exciting. It'll be fun in the offseason to talk about potential quarterbacks for the Jets, for the Colts, and what that can do for fantasy and the NFL and everything.
Yeah, in a future episode, I want to talk about that and sort of the free agent quarterbacks this year, where they're going to end up next year. So let's keep that on the list.
Absolutely.
I think there's a lot to talk about with that.
No doubt, no doubt. Dave, you kind of teased it here. What is your bold call for this week?
All right, my bold call, I mean, I don't even think it's that bold. My bold call is the Lions win out. They win their last 3, and they get a wild card. And in the first round, they're going to either play the 49ers or the Vikings. They're not going to beat the 49ers. But if they play the Vikings, they're going to beat them. So that's my bold call. My bold call is they win out, finish at 10-7, and then they beat the Vikings in the first round, if that's who they play.
I like that a lot.
What is your bold call of the week?
I don't know how bold this is, kind of like you, but and what could be the game of the week? I think Aaron Rodgers goes to Miami, wins one on the road, and keeps Green Bay's playoff hopes alive.
Yeah, I'm scared of that one as a Dolphin fan.
Yeah.
Green Bay played pretty poorly early in the season, but they kind of have everyone back now. I'm not sure if David Bakhtiari's back, but they have Romeo Doubs back now, so they're kind of have their full complement of receivers. And I think that'll be a good game. I think it'll be close.
Yeah, I mean, we're starting to see AJ Dillon's kind of getting going. That run game is looking better every week too. So it's scary. That's another team I would hate to face in the playoffs.
Yep. Yeah, I think no one wants them in the playoffs, and it's still a long shot for them because they are 6-8. If they win out, they have a chance.
Yes, sir. All right, Dave. This is the part of the show where we talk about the content that we're creating and when we're producing it and where we can find it. Tell us what you got going on right now.
Yep. So again, I'm at Pigskin Papers on Twitter, and I post all my articles there. But my blog is thepigskinpapers.com. Fantasy content is kind of winding down. I've been writing 2 fantasy columns a week. One preview, like a start sit kind of column, and a waiver wire column. Those, I probably have one more week of that. And I've been writing 1 NFL column a week, like kind of a recap, takeaways of the week. And I'll continue to do that through the playoffs. I'll probably preview the playoff games and do recaps.
Yeah. Your articles, when I get to read them, I always enjoy them. They're very helpful and very insightful, Dave.
Thanks. I appreciate that, Paul. I enjoy writing them, and I appreciate that anyone reads them. So
absolutely,
I'm always happy to hear, to get feedback on them. How about yourself?
So for me, on Mondays, me and my guy CD Piglet, aka Mike Crum, you can find him on Twitter at CD Piglet. On Mondays, we record a recap of the Cowboys game from the day prior. That podcast is called Across the Cowboys. We stream live on Twitter every Monday night. And lately on Fridays, the past couple of weeks, we've been doing a preview show for the Cowboys game. I don't believe we'll be doing that this Friday, but you can always find us on Mondays at 9 o'clock there on Twitter. Again, it's called Across the Cowboys. And every week I have not necessarily my starter sit article, but it's called Trust Your Bust, players who are inside the top 12 that I think will finish outside the top 12, and players outside the top 12 that I think will finish inside the top 12 and who I like more. So you can find that on Twitter as well. It usually my editor usually edits it and releases it on Saturdays again on Twitter. So be on the lookout for that as well.
I've read that column. It's excellent. So everyone should be on the lookout for that. All right,
appreciate
Paul.
You, Dave.
This was our first co-hosting experience.
Yes.
I enjoyed it a lot. Thanks for letting me do this with you and having you back on the show. And hopefully we'll be back to do this again next week.
Yeah, the pleasure's all mine, Dave. This was fun. This is a fun format. I like the change. You did an excellent job. I don't know if this is your first ever show sheet, but you did excellent, sir.
It was my first ever show sheet, so thank you very much. All right,
yes,
I think that's a wrap. So good night, everyone. Have a very Merry Christmas, happy holidays in general, and good luck to everyone who's got a fantasy playoff matchup this week.
Yes, sir. Go Cowboys. Good night, guys.
Good night.